Just a few days ago on Simchat Torah, we completed the reading of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, and immediately restarted the cycle by returning to the creation story at the beginning of the book of Genesis. The opening chapter of our Torah describes 6 days of creation, where God creates light and darkness, the heavenly lights, dry land, plants, fish, birds, animals, and finally, human beings. On the 7th day, God pauses, giving us this, the Sabbath day, to rest and renew ourselves. In the first creation story, humanity is the final part of creation, and God says, "Let us make humans in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all creeping things that creep on earth." And God created humanity in God's image. In the image of God, the Creator created him. Male and female, God created them. Classical and modern commentators have filled countless pages trying to work out exactly what this verse means. What exactly does it mean to be created in the image of God? Jewish tradition famously does not describe God physically and simultaneously gives many physical descriptions of God. The 10 Commandments tell us not to make idols or images of God, and the Torah does not give a comprehensive description of God's image. Adam and Eve speak to God in the Garden of Eden, but we are told that God moved through the garden. But there's no indication whether this means God walked on 2 feet, glided like a specter, or moved with the wind. And throughout the Tanakh, God speaks to the patriarchs and prophets, and some matriarchs, through dreams and visions. But even Moses is denied the chance to see God's face, permitted only to see God's back. Our rabbinic sources and liturgy often refer to God's hand, God's face, and God's outstretched arm. But we're meant to understand these, I think, as metaphors, not literal physical attributions of the divine. So we're left with the question, what does it mean that humanity is created in God's image? The Mishnah from the 2nd-ish century offers this teaching. The first human being was created alone to tell of the greatness of the Holy Blessed One. When a person casts several coins with one mold, they are all similar to each other. But the Supreme Sovereign, the Holy Blessed One, stamps all people with the seal of Adam, the first human, and not one of them is similar to another. According to the Mishnah, the first human is created in the divine image, and when each subsequent person is created in the divine image as well, they all look different. God's image is thus not static for the Mishnah, and the very fact that each of us is different is a testament to the greatness of the Creator. The Talmud, think 5th-ish century, expands on this idea and teaches that being created in the image of God is not a description of humanity, but a prescription for action. One should follow the attributes of the Holy Blessed One. Just as God clothes the naked, so too you should clothe the naked. Just as the Holy Blessed One visits the sick, so too you should visit the sick. Just as the Holy One consoles mourners, so too should you console mourners. Just as the Holy Blessed One buried the dead, so too should you bury the dead. For humanity to be created in the image of God is not a physical description, but a direction for how to live a moral and upright life. One performs godliness through our actions, specifically here, caring for the most vulnerable in our community. And in this understanding, being created in the image of God is something we must constantly work towards. Many years ago, I had a teacher who said, once we start trying to define the image of God, we begin to exclude one another from that description. For example, if we say that God has a particular race, class, or gender, we exclude part of humanity. Even in the best of intentions, if we say that the image of God is kindness, we take away from the humanity of those who we do not see as kind. If we define this image as intelligence, merit, or achievement, or anything else measurable in this way, we begin to exclude others. The Torah's intentional ambiguity thus allows for the broadest and perhaps most inclusive understanding, as it opens space for our commentators, scholars, and each individual person encountering this story to develop their own understanding of what it means to be created in the divine image. These verses of sacred text, in their determination not to define the image of God, have also opened space for people from marginalized communities to find a foothold in our sacred texts and open new and interesting conversations from their lived experiences. Feminist scholar and author Judith Plaskow examines these verses and their impact on Jewish theology. She writes that simply changing our pronouns for God to she, or using feminine terms like Shekhinah, the Kabbalistic idea of the divine feminine, does not actually create a feminist theology. Rather, she looks at Jewish feminist theology as an attempt to give more expansive ideas of God, some that are nature-based, creation-based, water-based. And in her book from 1990, Standing Again at Sinai, Plaskow writes, Jewish feminists seek to name God out of our own experiences, transforming traditional conceptions of God in a deep and far-reaching way. And speaking of one particular group of Christian feminist thinkers, Plaskow writes, one of the fascinating aspects of the resulting list of ideas of God is the large number of ing words: changing, creating, enabling, nurturing, pushing, calling into question, suffering, touching, breaking through. The God of their experience was not an immutable being out there, but a process of which they were part. Plaskow's work, along with the writing and scholarship of other feminist theologians, challenged this norm that the God of the Bible could only be examined through androcentric or masculine lens. Books like Plaskow's or the Women's Torah Commentary were revolutionary as they broke ground for a new generation of Jewish thinkers from various backgrounds and identities to share their own lens and perspectives on Jewish texts. I'll return us to our verse. God created humankind in the divine image. In the image of God, in the divine image, God created him. Male and female, God created them. Today, queer Jewish thinkers have similarly found themselves represented not only in this verse itself, but in a classical midrashic, 5th century understanding of the biblical grammar. The rabbis ask, how many people are created in this verse? Why do we switch from God created him to God created them? And their answer might surprise you. Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar said, when the Holy Blessed One created the first human, God created him, in Hebrew we say androgonous, but androgynous. Thus it is written, God created them male and female. Rabbi Yirmiyah argues that God actually created a being that was multiple genders at once. Perhaps multiple sexes if we want to be very specific to his time frame. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said, when the Holy Blessed One created the first human, God created him with two faces and later split him in two and made for him two backs, a back here and a back there. So in this 5th century midrash, our sages imagined a being created with multiple sexes and or genders. And this first human being is not male or man, as many of our picture books of the Bible show, but rather a complex being. For trans, non-binary, intersex, and gender-creative people, this midrash serves as a powerful form of representation in the text. It reminds us that we have always been part of our own tradition since the very opening verses of the Torah, and it's opened space for the crafting of more queer-inspired midrash and personal interpretation. I'll bring you one more idea of the image of God. Scholar and disability activist Julia Watts-Belzer reflects on the experience of reading a passage of Ezekiel that illustrates God's chariot, where the prophet describes the angels who carry the chariot are actually beings made of wheels. She writes, "Some years ago, sitting in synagogue on Shavuot morning, Ezekiel's vision split open my imagination. As I was reading that description of God's divine chariot, I felt a jolt of recognition, an intimate familiarity, a whimsical sense of kinship. I thought, God has wheels. When I think of God on wheels, I think of the delight I take in my own wheelchair, the satisfaction I take from a life lived on wheels. My wheels set me free and open up my spirit." For Belzer, this description of God as having wheels opened up a spiritual, emotional, and theological connection. After all, if we are each created in the image of God, that image must also include the use of mobility devices and other accessibility aids. It might be obvious to you by now that I am not going to tell you what God looks like. I invite you instead to look around at each person in this room, or on your computer screen, or in your home if you're watching us on live stream. And in the words of our patriarch Jacob, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. Jewish tradition famously does not tell us what God looks like, only that we are created in God's image. Perhaps then, the divine image is not, in fact, an image at all, but rather an invitation to encounter each person as sacred and to see the godliness in one another. Shabbat Shalom.